Cars used to have attitude. There used to be a million different choices, but these days they're all amorphous blobs that blend in with one another, made solely to get you from point A to point B. So many cars look incredibly similar to one another nowadays, it's infuriating. If I took the logos off each of these cars, you would not be able to tell the difference at a glance. Behold, the Nissan Sentra and the Honda Accord. Tell me the difference. Design's gotten seriously lazy over the years. This line has been uttered by me on dozens of occasions, and I'm inclined to believe that the internet would agree with me. However, a few weeks ago when I was making the video on the 80s cars being gross, oh boy, that went over well, I realized that this may not be a new phenomenon. As I scrolled through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, I noticed something. Cars have always been very similar. No, this is not me trying to be a smart ass saying that at the end of the day, they're just four wheels and an engine. I'm serious about this. Every single decade has fads. 20s, Art Deco, 60s, hippie, 80s, the dreaded carpeted bathrooms. They're all just examples of different ideas that people really enjoyed at the time, and cars are no different. Every single decade has their own idealistic body styles, and it drives me crazy that I've never noticed this before. So, sit back, kick up your legs, and get ready to learn a thing or three about car history. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we are going to be looking across three brands, Dodge, Ford, and Chevy. We're also mostly going to stick with the average car bought, four doors. Also, little reminder, I have a Redbubble. I take pictures of cars and throw them up there on various prints, posters, and buttons if you want it. My photos are pretty good if I do say so myself. There's a link in the description down below, so if you want some Christmas gifts, then you can always start there. Let's start with the 1910s. Cars really picked up midway through this decade. After Henry Ford figured out the ideal assembly line process, the other car companies jumped on board to implement this system into their own production facilities. In their infancy, cars didn't really have their own style, favoring something similar to the carriages of yesteryear. Now, there were always outliers here and there, but overall, car style could be whittled down to a box with some curvy fenders. Hashtag real cars have curves. Back then, the tech was so new that it was incredible just to see one in general, so there was no need to break the mold that much. Since they were slower, there wasn't a hardcore need for pesky things like windshields. When your top speed is 40 miles an hour, you're going to spend most of the time at like a third of that. There's really not much more to say about this era. It was just incredibly basic by modern standards. If you had four wheels and an engine, it was tight. So yeah, the 10s all looked pretty similar. Let's move on to the roaring 20s. Now, the 20s were a very different world from one just 10 years ago. World War I had come and gone, leaving much of Europe in tatters. Since the US joined late and saved everyone's butts without getting a ton of damage and debt, they were able to take advantage of the power vacuum and place themselves pretty close to the top of the world. Side note, I could go on for hours about how the two world wars are the reason why the USA is on top of the world, but that's a completely different topic that has no place in a car channel. As for all the Europeans frothing at the mouth at the thought of the US saving their bacon in World War I, suck my cheeks. Because of us, all of a sudden, Brits and French troops had thousands of fresh troops ready to kill. Germans had nobody coming to help them, and the manpower was enough to tip the scales in your favor. How about a thank you every once in a while? Anyways, the world was different, and reparations were able to help the US fund some new projects, like paved roads. The vehicles from the 1910s were very tractor-like, oftentimes being a better choice for off-road driving than a lot of modern cars. Sorry, my cat's right here. And yeah, I can back that up. Here's a Model T at an angle test, or whatever it's called. With less need for this hardcore off-road suspension, cars got lower and longer, focusing more on comfort than rugged dependability. And with more money in the pocket of the average American, companies sold more and were able to experiment with new setups to make power, with some super cool engine layouts like straight 8s, V16s, and more. These larger motors would cause engine bays to expand even further, making cars even longer because now it wasn't just a style, it was a necessity. However, this is also the beginning of automotive monotony. For every big exuberant car that pushed boundaries, there was 50 that followed dialed back versions of the same style that were more affordable for the common man. For example, here's a 1927 Ford Model A. Beautiful and unique, right? Well, here's a 1927 Chevrolet AA Capital and a 1927 Dodge 100. To the untrained eye, these cars look the same, and yes, you can make an argument that there are small differences in roof lines, grills, etc., but you can make the exact same argument for modern cars. It's not even just the four-seaters too. This is true for all the two-doors, the roadsters, and more. Now, enough of the 20s, let's get into the 30s. The 30s, on average, further changed design with the monocoque chassis coming into play. I really hope I pronounced that right, or else I'm never going to hear the end of it. Instead of a bunch of smaller pieces, the basic body of the car was one big piece. Pieces like headlights, running boards, and taillights started to get molded into the body, though this wouldn't really reach its fruition until years later. This fed into the aero craze, where cars got a lot smoother than the old school blocky ones. Some of the most popular cars from this pyramid. Some of the most popular cars from this period were the business coupes. Plymouth, Ford, Chevrolet, all the cars meant for daily driving looked very similar, which makes sense because they were all meant to serve similar purposes. There was the occasional outlier, like the absolutely beautiful 35 Bugatti Aerolith, but that's exactly what these cars were, outliers. You see what I'm kind of getting at? Yeah, there's always like outliers, like I was saying, but there's a lot that look exactly the same. On to the 40s. Now, the 40s were a weird decade, mostly due to the fact that a decent portion of the world was busy killing each other, my great-grandfather included. Car makers switched up to making planes and tanks, and there were whole years without new models. Before the Mustache Man attacked, it looked like cars were going to follow the same trajectory set by the 30s. Smoother bodies, better performance. And post-war, that's exactly what they did, but at an even quicker rate due to the jumps in tech the war provided. Cars no longer looked like a grouping of parts. They instead started to look like one big cohesive machine. Not now, Panther. You can mostly see this with the headlights as they begin to have the fenders surrounding them. Big grills were also a hugely popular choice. You think the Lexus grills today are big? Ooh boy, you are in for a surprise. Big rectangles, that was the name of the game. However, the post-war wealth felt by a lot of these companies was starting to show up in their designs. They hadn't quite reached the daily commuters yet, but companies began taking big risks in design, particularly in their trucks. Chevrolet kept it safe, but Dodge and Ford were trying something new. Not now, Panther. Now to the 50s. In my personal opinion, this is the only decade in American history where cars actively tried to look different than their competition. There were similarities under parent companies like Chevrolet, Buick, and Pontiac, but when it came to the big groups, a whole lot of new ideas were tried. Let's start with a basic comparison of the four-door models in 1955. Dodge, you got this beautiful design with some tiny wings in the back and a fancy split grille in the front. You also experimented with a two-tone paint job where you split it on the hood instead of just on the side. Very good work. And Chevy, my, you're at the beginning of your Tri-5 era. A little bit more conservative than Dodge, but a lot beefier of an overall design that looks like it's ready to pounce. And you split the two-tone differently as well, making it split the car at an overall diagonal angle. Very interesting stuff. And Ford, sweet Ford. The entire bottom half of the front of your car is chrome on your new Fairlane model. I especially love the jet booster taillight you've got. Plus, you split your two-tone into 3 different sections. Awesome work. You see what I'm saying? These cars are all serving the same purpose. They look a little sporty, but you're able to bring the family with you. But they look completely different, unlike other years. With these cars, the only thing similar is the fact that there's 4 doors. The choices back then were insane. We talked about how crazy things got in the late 50s, where car brands got even wilder, particularly in 59 with the Impala, the Fairlane, and the Royal. Chrome, wings, and shiny things galore, all zealously placed and looking pretty great on average. It's a shame this was the main decade that variety was the spice of life, because come the 60s, cars got a bit more conservative. Think of the 50s as the car industry's wild teenage years. They threw everything at the wall just to find out what stuck. Now, if the 60s come around, they're like the mid-20s. Freshly graduated from college and eager to come across as professional, these designs dialed back the fun, but they still had enough to go around. Let's look at what the big 3 had to offer. Alright, we got the 65 Chevelle, the 65 Galaxy, and the 65 Coronet. All very cool cars in their own right, but it's really just Ford trying the fancy schmancy stuff with the vertical headlights, but even that isn't that crazy. A big step down from 10 years ago, if you ask me. Cars in general became very easy to draw, not necessarily a bad thing. However, while the day-to-day cars became a bit more boring, the performance car market was off the chain. Every American brand had a unique muscle car that looked different from the rest. Skylarks, Mustangs, and Chargers, they were popping off. However, this list is about regular cars, not the cool ones. Just wanted to bring up that because I know some person's going to be complaining that I don't know what I'm talking about. Now, on to the 70s. Okay, so now we're at the 80s. Fine, I will begrudgingly talk about the 70s. So, new laws came out because of unsafe at any speed and had a bunch of safety and pedestrian stuff. Now, there were ugly bumpers. Not now, Bubbas. Now, there were ugly bumpers, specificities on hood heights, that kind of thing. Overall, it's a very dark period in automotive design. Here's the 75 Caprice, the 75 LTD, the 75 Royal. At least Ford tried something different, even though it was hideous. Thank you, Panther, for making it a lot easier for me to get through the 70s. That decade always makes me sad. It's good, kitty. Now we're at the 80s, which is really just a slightly nicer version of the 70s. As per my 80s video, boxiness was in and style was out for regular cars. Sure, there's always outliers, but if you weren't driving a performance car, you blended in with everybody else. This is where cars looked almost exactly the same on average to me, which is a big reason of why I hate the 80s so much. If you look at the 85 Impala, the 85 Diplomat, and the 85 LTD Ground Vic, there's just nothing there. No fancy trims, no fancy color schemes, just ugly muted blocks that got you from point A to point B. Yeah, the 20s and 30s look similar, but at least they look good, not like these things. Square lights with a style, and that's pretty much it. I guarantee you, unless you owned one of these cars, if I removed the badges, you would not be able to know which one's which. On to the 90s. Now, here things begin to get a little bit more interesting. At the very least, the hideous design deals of the 70s and 80s are gone, replaced with a new bubbly feel that would start in this decade. Got the 95 Caprice, the 95 Neon, and of course, the 95 Contour. Now, these cars are starting to experiment more with the headlights, with the Ford having the narrow eye look, the Dodge having 2 circles attached to a rectangle, and the Chevy having happy eyes. Fun fact, this is really when you could start imagining faces on cars. Did anybody else do that? Or was it really just me? I mean, look at this dude. He seems pretty happy. While there were some changes, the 90s commuter cars really did look similar, however, but it was a step in the right direction. And now we're at the modern day. I know technically I should talk about the 2000s and 2010s, but they really just followed the same trends as the 90s, just taking it further each time. No huge world-changing events means that styles are going to stagnate a tad. Modern cars look a lot alike, as their general shape is heavily influenced by aerodynamics. But for every modern boring car, there is a new, interesting shape for the performance vehicles. Challengers, Supras, Camaros, the Nissan Z, these cars all look completely different from one another with their own unique design language. It's only the regular traffic that blends together, and after checking out all the decades, I guess it's always been like that, which is what I've been trying to tell you this entire time. When we think of classic cars, we tend to think of the memorable ones, not the regular traffic. Most people have never heard of or thought about a 65 Country Squire, but they will always remember a 65 Mustang when they see it. We always remember the highlights, not the cars that didn't get our attention. Yes, there's unique vehicles in every generation, but with the overwhelming amount of people just buying a car for a source of transportation, you're going to get a lot of sameness. Remember, us enthusiasts are the vocal minority, nothing more. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something from this video. It took a lot of work and research to put it together. Hate my guts? Comment down below. Maybe I'll bless you with the attention you so desperately deserve. Remember to check out my Redbubble, and I hope you have a good day. Peace.